This is your chance to speak with Governor Edwards and personally ask your question. The phone number is 877-217-5757. Get a line now. We're underway. This is Ask the Governor on the Louisiana Radio Network.
Thank you, Neil Gladner. I am Jim Inkster, and I'll be your moderator today. And Governor John Bel Edwards is here to field all comers. 877-217-5757 is your number, and we're going to go to the phone lines. We do ask that you be brief because, as you can expect, many people would like to talk with the governor. So keep your questions to about 20 to 30 seconds, and also make them in the form of questions. 877-217-5757. And Governor Edwards, before we go to the lines, you're the first governor in 13 years to do something like this. Why did you decide to make yourself available to the people of Louisiana via a radio show?
Well, Jim, first of all, thank you for allowing us to do this. And we wanted to do this because it's a practice that I developed during the campaign to be accessible, to listen to people all across the state, both in person and on the radio, and thought it would be a good practice to continue now that I'm in the governor's office, especially in light of the difficult circumstances that we're faced with in Louisiana, and my commitment to listen to the people and to engage them in a constructive dialogue about our future, to listen to their concerns and their ideas, because I believe that we need to move forward together. And so that's why we're doing this. And if you let me take just a moment to address all of the listeners out there and thank them for joining us on the very first edition of Ask the Governor, which is my new monthly radio show dedicated to hearing about the issues and the concerns that are important to you and providing you with information about the work that I and my administration are doing to make life better in Louisiana. And I want to thank all of you for listening today, and everybody for what they do for our great state. The show was obviously created to begin an ongoing dialogue between us and move the debate forward on all the critical issues, not as Republicans and Democrats, but as Louisianans first and foremost. And I am looking forward to it. So today also marks the first 100 days of the new administration. And while there have been some pretty tough challenges and no shortage of things to do, we've accomplished a lot and of course still have a lot of work to go. But I want everybody to know that I'm as optimistic about the future of our state today as I was when I started my campaign, when I was elected, and when I was sworn in to be governor. So I look forward to this radio show. We're going to do it every month, and I want to thank you, Jim, and all the folks at the Louisiana Radio Network and all the folks around the state with the different stations who are carrying this program for making it available for the people of Louisiana. So the name of the show is Ask the Governor. I'm ready to get started.
All right, 877-217-5757. It's toll free. If you receive a busy signal, be patient, and you should be able to get in. But we're going to try to get to as many folks as possible, so please make your questions brief. We start with Brian in Shreveport. Good afternoon, Brian. You're on Ask the Governor.
Yes, thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, Governor.
Thank you, Brian.
I wanted to ask you why you did not come out more strongly opposed to the leveraged buyout of Clico by Macquarie, an Australian hedge fund, and if you are aware of the consequences that we're going to face now due to what has happened here. And the company talked about rate credits and even convinced Foster Campbell to go along with them, but those rate credits are coming out of borrowed billions of dollars that are going to be borrowed. And you didn't take a stance against it, and your chief of staff came out in favor of it. And I think.
All right, go ahead, Governor, respond, if you will, to Brian in Shreveport.
Well, Brian, thank you for the question. As you probably know, the Constitution vests the authority to regulate utilities in the Public Service Commission and not in the governor's office. I will tell you that I did follow this, but not as someone with the responsibility for making the decision. I do know that there was a close call in the minds of some folks on the Public Service Commission, and at the end of the day, it's my understanding that when there was an agreement that electric rates would not be raised, and I think through the year 2020, I might be a little off on that, that a couple of commissioners who had originally voted against the proposal changed their votes and voted for it. And you mentioned Foster Campbell. I believe he was one of them, as well as Lambert Boissier. As for the role that my chief of staff may have played, I will tell you, I'm unaware that he involved himself in the merits of that particular matter. I will tell you, as a governor of Louisiana, I do appreciate the fact that there will be $7 million now put up by the purchasers in order to make that money available in central Louisiana for economic development purposes, so that we can create some jobs and get the economy moving again in central Louisiana.
Andy in New Orleans. Andy, good afternoon. You're on Ask the
Hi,
Governor.
thank you very much for taking my phone call. Governor, my question deals with the Division of the Arts and the Louisiana cultural districts and the overlays that go with it. Specifically, I'm an artist on Ferret Street, uptown New Orleans, and because the district because I'm a cultural district, I make culture and fine art that's one of a kind that is intended to help revitalize the neighborhood and be used to attract artists such as myself to rehab and build new buildings and have our studios in here. But I noticed that it's being cut, and I was wondering if that's just on the table, if it's a definitive thing, or if it's something that's under consideration. And then lastly, with that, is there a way for you to maybe consider cutting certain parts of the program?
All right, go ahead.
Well, Andy, thank you for the question, and I'm going to have to get back with you to get more information so that I can be responsive. I do want to tell you that one of the things that makes our state great, and I always think about this when I'm introduced as the governor of the great state of Louisiana, is our unique culture, our unique history, our heritage here in Louisiana. And a big part of that revolves around the arts. And I will tell you, it was just a couple of weeks ago that Donna and I were at the annual banquet for the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. And we do I support the arts. But I will tell you that when you inherit record deficits, I wish I had inherited a record surplus, that'd be a different problem, then you have no choice but to make cuts to programs that you believe to be worthy, that you don't want to cut. And when that deficit is $2 billion, whittled down now to $750 million short, those cuts are widespread and deeper than you want them to be, including.
You're listening to Ask the Governor with Governor John Bel Edwards on the Louisiana Radio Network.
This is Jim Inkster. Michelle Southern is producing. The show is Ask the Governor, and the star of the show is the governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards, and his 100th day as the state's chief executive. It's your time to ask the governor a question if you like, and if you join us, please be brief in your question to our state's leader. 877-217-5757. Yvonne from Angie, Louisiana, near Bogalusa. Good afternoon, Yvonne. You're on with the governor.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I'm concerned about the TOPS program because some children, they're our future, and they can't make a 28 on that test. And I understand that Mr. Fields left 80% of the money there for that TOPS program, and the state had to come up with 20%. So I'm concerned about it.
All right. She may be talking about Pat Taylor, but...
Well, Yvonne, thank you for the question. First of all, TOPS costs $300 million this year to fully fund. $60 million comes from the tobacco settlement, and $240 million is needed in state general fund in order to fully fund the program. The problem we have is a general fund shortfall of $750 million in the budget year that starts July 1st. Simply put, there's just not enough money to fund what we all believe to be important programs and priorities such as TOPS. We're not funding higher education the way that we should, our hospitals, K through 12 education, corrections, any number of state agencies. I will tell you that I hope and expect that we will fully fund TOPS. We should have already done it. I had a plan that had the legislature gone along with me in the first special session. Your question would not have been necessary today because in the budget that I would have presented last week with Jay Darden, TOPS would have been fully funded. We are going to have a second special session. It'll come late in June. and I expect to have the TOPS program fully funded well before the start of the fall semester. As for the ACT scores, I will tell you there is a bill that I do support by Senator Blade Morris that would change the way shortfalls in TOPS funding gets allocated. Presently, you start at the top and relative to ACT scores, and you fully fund every scholarship on the way down until you run out of money. This bill would change that, and so that we would have a pro rata allocation of funding for every TOPS recipient, so that if let's say at the end of the day, and I hope this doesn't happen, but let's say we fund 50% of the TOPS program, then everybody would get 50% of their award as opposed to some people going without, and I do support that approach.
Trudy in Lafayette. Good afternoon, Trudy. You're on Ask the Governor with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hi, Governor. I was calling to ask if you had any plans on putting the oil field workers back to work and helping all of the many families in Louisiana that are struggling, that were laid off.
Yeah, well, first of all, Trudy, thank you very much for calling in. That's a concern that we all have. And of course, we've been through this before, and it always corrects itself. It's always a question of timing, because we're talking about a commodity that responds to the international market. But it is a huge concern of ours, not just because we've got 12,000 workers in the oil and gas sector in Louisiana that have lost their jobs over the last year, and not just because of the revenue that's lost both to local government and state government as a function of the job losses, but because every one of these people represent real human beings with families that depend upon them. And so, yes, we're working very hard in order to forecast the jobs that are not just in demand today, but are going to be in demand in the future, and reorienting job training through our community and technical colleges, for example, to make sure that people have the requisite skills and education to get the jobs that are available so that they can be cross-trained. We have some very good programs. We are also trying to marshal resources, leverage a private sector investment, and so that we can stretch the dollar even further in order to accomplish this. It's easier said than done, but obviously it's important for the state as a whole that people keep their jobs. It's critically important for those families, and obviously the state revenue is down as a result of the change in oil prices. So the sooner we can get on top of this situation, the better off we're all going to be.
Winter calling from New Orleans. Good afternoon, Winter. You are on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I would like to ask the governor, when Louisiana is a state that is the worst in the nation for women, that he expresses support for the 72-hour additional waiting time for women seeking abortions.
Yeah, Winter, first of all, thank you for your call. It's not an additional 72 hours. The waiting period would go from 24 to 72, so that's an additional 48 hours. I do support it. As you probably know, I am pro-life. I've developed that record over 8 years in the legislature. I didn't run as anything other than being pro-life, and certainly that's the way that I'm going to act as governor. I do have serious concerns, as you do, that we don't do well on many measures related to women in Louisiana. First and foremost, we are at the very top of the worst list imaginable. The biggest pay gap in the country between what women make and men make for doing the same work is right here in Louisiana. In fact, we're 51st because they include the District of Columbia, and it's 65 cents on average. It's 48 cents on the dollar for women of color. And that is why I am proposing, and we have moving through the legislature right now, a pay equity bill that's designed to make sure women and men are paid the same for the same work. So I share many of your concerns. I don't necessarily share all the prescriptions that you do, but I thank you for your call.
Thank you. Steve in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Steve. You're on Ask the Governor.
Governor Edwards, it's an honor to speak with you, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, my question is, I'm real concerned. I'm a stepfather of a 21-year-old with cerebral palsy, senior in high school, graduates this year from Denham Springs High School. My question's about the vouchers for them for extra care and stuff like that. We had a rally a week ago at the Capitol trying to gain support, and just wondering your thoughts on that, sir.
Well, first of all, I think you're talking about the waiver program.
Yes.
Specifically. I want you to know that as tough as the budget is, $750 million short, that some of the good news is that with the Medicaid expansion that I signed into law by virtue of an executive order on January the 12th, the state is going to save $184 million in the first year alone. And I moved some of those savings, in fact, several $million, into the waiver program, so that we are actually going to fund more waivers next year than we did this year. That is how committed I am to that program. I have been in the legislature for 8 years. I know families who come to the legislature year after year who've been on a waiting list, and of course the slogan is a waiting list is not a service. I agree with that completely, and I say all the time that a civilized society is measured by how it treats its old, its young, and those who can't take care of themselves. We have to do better. This is a small step that we're making this year to actually do better. And when we have the resources available, we're going to do a lot better. So, Steve, I appreciate your call, and I want you to know that we're going to partner with you and with other parents of disabled children so that we do treat them better and make more services available to enhance the quality of life, not just for the disabled community, but for their loved ones as well.
Melinda in Shreveport, or is it Melinthia? Melinthia in Shreveport. Good afternoon.
Yes.
You're on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon. Yes, sir. I would like to know why is it so hard for a senior citizen to get food stamps?
Well, I don't know that there's any particular roadblocks or hurdles in the way for senior citizens to get food stamps. As you know, food stamps is really called the Supplemental Nutrition Program. It's SNAP benefits, and the rules, for the most part, come from the federal government. But I can try to get some additional information from you and find out whether you or whoever it is that you're concerned about actually do qualify or should qualify. And if so, make sure that you're connected with the right agency and people to make that happen for you.
Your number is 877-217-5757. The show is Ask the Governor. Governor John Bel Edwards is with us. Cornelius in Alexandria. And Cornelius, our producer Michelle Southern says you have a question regarding pardons. And I would ask you that if the question is about a specific pardon, that this would be a topic that would be better suited for another time. But if it's about pardons in general, then that's fine. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, Jim, thank you for asking and I'm listening to you on KSYL 970 AM here in Alexandria,
Very good.
Louisiana. Governor, I met you when you came through Ellick at Spirits one day. I was applying for a pardon, but it's a presidential pardon, and I gave you some paperwork, but I'll try to send you some more because the president's granting all these clemencies, but not pardons. But I just wanted his help on that. And,
all right. Well, do you have a hard and fast rule on pardons, Governor?
Well, first of all, I haven't executed any pardons yet, haven't granted any. We do have a pardon and parole board that meets and considers applications, and there is a system that they will follow to get me those pardon applications that they view favorably. Now, with respect to whether the president ever issues one, that's certainly up to the president. And I appreciate Cornelius calling and asking the question. My ability to influence that will be extremely limited if I have any ability whatsoever.
Bonnie in Slidell. Bonnie, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Hi, Governor Edwards. I'm from Moonraker Island, which is in the southernmost section of Slidell, Louisiana, just off Lake Pontchartrain. And we were absolutely devastated by Hurricane Katrina, and people have worked very hard to build their properties back. But the problem that we have is we still don't have flood protection. Levees have been built all around us, which sends the water directly to us. And we're stuck with insurance companies We can't change insurance companies. Properties have been devalued.
Well, Miss Bonnie, I think I understand the situation. I am not personally familiar with the precise area where you live, but we can take a look at what the plans are in terms of flood protection and see if there's any way to grant you and your neighbors some relief down there. I do know that flood insurance can be extremely expensive, especially if you live outside of a protected area, or even if you're inside a protected area, but if the levees aren't built to federal specifications, they will not be considered when the flood map is developed. And so while I'm not familiar with your particular area, I will, and even though the flood insurance program is a federal program, there may be some things that we can do here in Louisiana to extend to you some help. And so we'll try to get with you and get some more information.
We're about 30 seconds from going to a break, Governor, but in your first 100 days, what do you like best about the job?
Well, first of all, I remain very excited about the state, about our future, about being governor. There have been a lot of challenges and a lot of work to do, and of course we're still working through it in session. But it's been a great experience overall.
Your number is 877-217-5757. We're halfway through the hour, and we'll have more from Governor John Bel Edwards after this time out on the Louisiana Radio Network. This is Ask the Governor. I'm Jim Inkster, your moderator. Michelle Southern's the producer, and Governor John Bel Edwards is the host. Your number is 877-217-5757. If you receive a busy signal, please be patient, keep trying, and you should be able to get in. Let's start this round with Chuck in Metairie. Good afternoon, Chuck. You're on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon, Governor. Good afternoon, Governor. I want to thank you for hosting this. I think it's a great idea. During the recent session, they passed something in which not-for-profits are now required to pay tax on everything, any source of revenue, and that also impacts schools. So now my child's school, anything they do to raise funds, whether it's a dance or a admission to a game, they're required to pay tax. Do you think what's overly broad, or is there any chance that might be repealed in the future?
Well, Chuck, thank you for the question. As you know, in the special session, the main source of new revenue that we created was a new penny of sales tax. There was also an effort to clean some exemptions off of existing pennies as a way to produce additional revenue. I can tell you that at the time the session ended at 6 p.m. on that day, there was another bill that was pending that, had it gotten all the way through the process, would have cleaned up some of this. But because we passed the new penny bill and the bill cleaning existing pennies, but didn't pass the third bill that I'm talking about, there were some unintended impacts, in fact, some of the ones that you just mentioned. I do believe that that's going to get cleaned up in the very near future, because there was no intention, for example, at least not on my part and on the legislature's part, insofar as I can determine, to require that school lunches be subject to sales tax, or things like admission to a football game or a baseball game at a high school sporting event. So I do believe that that's going to get cleaned up. And it's not an awful lot of revenue anyway, and so it wasn't what we intended. It was a function of the very hurried, haphazard manner that the session went through in that last few hours.
Francis in Shreveport, welcome to Ask the Governor. Hi, Francis.
Hi, Governor. This is Francis Kelly from Shreveport, Louisiana, and I have a question about your stance on House Bill 11 and on the open burning of hazardous waste in Louisiana. It's been illegal for over 40 years in this country to burn hazardous waste, and we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, the United States taxpayers have, over the past several decades to come up with alternative technologies that are capable of treating that. And given that, I want to know, why aren't you supporting House Bill 11, and why isn't the Department of Environmental Quality shutting down the open burn operation in Colfax?
Well, Francis, again, like all the other callers, thank you for your question. I will tell you that there's not an effort right now by DEQ or my administration to shut down that operation in Colfax because we don't believe that it's in violation of any existing standards. There's not a basis upon which to do so. I will tell you that I was in Minden just a couple of weeks ago to tour that facility in terms of the closed burn apparatus that is in place that ESI has the contract to construct and then to operate to dispose of all of the propellant that was being stored there on Camp Minden. Again, that's going to be a closed burn. We're going to be able to go through that and see how it works and whether that technology is able to be replicated and whether it truly is superior and it's a viable way to dispose of large amounts of hazardous materials. And so we're going to know much more about this going forward. And I have an open mind on House Bill 11. I will tell you that my mind certainly isn't closed, but at this point in time, I'm not prepared to say that all open burning of for example, of explosives has to be done with a closed apparatus.
Steve in Mandeville. Steve, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon. First off, I just wanted to say, Governor, you made me proudly eat my words because I didn't think a Democrat could win in this state. And I was very glad you did. First off, the TOPS program, I've heard some people say an idea of making like the first year a low-interest loan and lower that every year until the student finishes, which would penalize the people that just don't go on and finish, but it would, make the program a little more, I would think, viable if we could do that. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Steve, I do, and it's a concept that has been under consideration for a number of years, probably even before I came to the legislature in 2008. I will tell you, one of the problems, as I understand it, with that concept is under the Constitution, the state cannot forgive debt, and so you can't forgive a loan. If you call it a loan program, then we have to get it back from all of the students, whether or not they actually finish. And so that is one of the impediments to doing as you suggest. But there are some things that we can do to increase the sustainability, the viability of the TOPS program, one of which is we've got to stop annual double-digit tuition increases because every time you increase tuition, you necessarily increase the cost of the TOPS program unless we pass a bill this year, which we probably will, that Senator Donahue in your area over there in Mandeville has authored that would separate the cost of TOPS from automatic tuition increases and go ahead and cap the overall TOPS cost at $300 million. And then in the future, the legislature can, if and when it chooses, catch that program up so that TOPS would then cover the cost of any additional tuition. But I think there is a problem with the approach that you suggest from a legal and technical standpoint. The state cannot just forgive a loan, and so I don't believe that approach works.
Jane in New Orleans. Good afternoon, Jane. You're on Ask the Governor with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hi, Governor. I just want to say I do really appreciate you doing this as well. I want to ask you in particular about a House bill that's currently before the municipal committee that would prevent local municipalities from regulating any kind of carriers, including plastic bags, and how you feel about local cities and communities having the right to be able to regulate waste for themselves, and whether or not that bill is overreach into local politics.
Well, first of all, we have political subdivisions in the state of Louisiana. You've got the state itself, and above the state, you've got the federal government. I believe in local control over most issues, and I believe that the democratic process allows this to happen in a way where the closer the government is to the people, the more responsive it's going to be and the more accountable it's going to be. Not that I will agree with everything that's done in every local decision that's going to be made, but I think we have to be very careful at the state level before we start enter into blanket prohibitions. so that we don't allow local governments, whether they're parish governments or city governments, to enact their own ordinances to do what it is that the majority of folks in that area want done. And this can be thought of as laboratories for democracy. And that's one of the things that makes our country great and our state great is we have people that we don't all think alike. But that doesn't mean that we ought to control the actions and decisions of others in every instance. And so I would like to see more latitude and not less in terms of what local government can do.
Carolyn in New Orleans. Good afternoon, Carolyn. You're on Ask the Governor.
Yes, I hear a lot about higher education, but I'm not hearing a lot about pre-K through 12.
Well, thank you very much. And I suspect that the reason that is because while I don't believe we have adequately funded K through 12 education over the last several years, when it comes to education funding, the state of Louisiana has disinvested, meaning cut state general fund support to higher education more than any other state in the nation, while for the most part, our funding for K through 12 education has been static. We haven't cut it and we haven't raised it very much either. And so by comparison, the funding for K through 12 education has been more adequate than higher ed. So that's why you're hearing more about it. Unfortunately, we're in a position this year where if we don't generate some more revenue, I believe that K through 12 education across the state of Louisiana is going to be cut by $50 million. And that's because there was about $50 million that was appropriated to school districts last year outside of the minimum foundation program, the funding formula for K through 12 schools. And so while it's technically the MFP won't be cut this year, that $50 million is not going to be appropriated again, and that will be the same thing as a cut. Obviously, that's something that I hope to address in the second special session as well. We ought to prioritize something in Louisiana, and if we can't prioritize funding for K through 12 public schools, I think we're in trouble.
This is Jim Inkster. Thank you for joining us. The show is Ask the Governor. The host is John Bel Edwards, the governor of Louisiana, in his 100th day. 877-217-5757 is your number, statewide, toll-free. Try Christina in Lafayette. Christina, you're on with Ask the Governor.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for doing this program so we can talk to you and you can know our concerns.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Christina.
I have concern about the government waste. We're already in deficit, be it local, Louisiana, and our nation. I'm asking if you would consider limiting special sessions of our legislature until everything that is supposed to be taken care of during the regular session is done.
Well, Christina, that wouldn't work because in the regular session this year, for example, it is not possible under the Constitution to raise revenue. When we realized that we had a deficit in the current year that exceeded $900 million and a deficit in next fiscal year, the year that starts July 1st, that exceeded $2 billion, I think the prudent thing was to have a special session in order to try to both cut spending and raise revenue so that we could have the opportunity to have a responsible, honest budget to meet the demands of the people of Louisiana. Waiting until after the regular session to do that, I don't think would have been wise because that would have invited a lot more instability to the state and caused unnecessary pain. So I think we had to do it when we did it.
Oklahoma's going through the same thing we're going through. Can we do anything with a constitutional convention, even a limited constitutional convention? Because you're never going to really solve these problems if we can only cut health and education. And thank you very much for your work. And also scrubbing the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, Joe, with respect to scrubbing the budget, I want you to know that in the current year, since I became governor, we have cut more than $230 million of state general fund out of the budget. And so that's part of the balanced approach that we're trying to take to tackle this fiscal crisis that we're in. With respect to whether we have to have a constitutional convention, I don't take that position right now. We are gearing up towards a comprehensive tax reform, for example, long-term structural tax reform for the session in 2017, which is going to be a fiscal session. We have a task force in place that is studying the issue to make recommendations to the legislature about best practices, ways to broaden the base, lower rates, but produce a revenue stream that is stable, predictable, fair, and sufficient. Now, if we are unable to do that in a responsible way in April of 2017, then a limited constitutional convention where we would open the Constitution as it relates to taxation, for example, may be in order. I am not someone who today believes that that's required.
Gene, good afternoon. I think it's Dr. Gene calling in Metairie. Gene, you're on with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hello. Good afternoon, Governor. I'm an OBGYN doctor on East Jefferson and Tulane Lakeside Hospital staffs. And morale among doctors is very, very low with regard to Medicaid. Many doctors don't take it, particularly OBGYN doctors. And the morale is so low with the payment hassles, the payment amount, and the payment hassles. And I haven't heard anything in all of this expansion of Medicaid that's going to try to help the doctors or raise the morale of doctors. I'm just not hearing anything, and I know personally from these two hospitals and other physician friends I have across the nation that Medicaid is just not liked by many doctors.
Well, Doctor, I appreciate the call. I will tell you that doctors who have privileges at hospitals will benefit from Medicaid expansion because the hospitals are going to be solvent, and they're going to be stronger. They're going to be able to keep their doors open, keep people employed, and continue to provide medical services going forward to more people. Secondly, with respect to the payments, I will tell you I've talked to many providers around the state. And with respect to, for example, the Bayou Health Program, there are some concerns about the 5 managed care organizations don't always operate in a uniform manner that requires a larger back office operation than they should have to maintain. It visits more costs and burden on them. It's an onerous process. I have instructed Dr. Gee, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Hospitals here in Louisiana, to make sure that we do a better job in the Department of Health and Hospitals to regulate these insurers and make them more responsive so that they're not unduly denying or delaying claims and that the claims payment process isn't more burdensome than it needs to be. And then obviously the next part of that is when we can, we obviously have to increase provider reimbursements. Those are all things that we are focused on. It's one step at a time, and I will tell you the Medicaid expansion was the first and most critical step in this process, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish thus far.
David and Zachary. David, you're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Thank you for taking my call. So I'm a college student at LSU, and I was wondering, with the cuts to TOPS and higher education being actually built into the Constitution, would you ever consider pushing towards a change to the Constitution in order to help free up more funds?
Well, Zachary, I'm sorry, you're David and Zachary. Thank you for the question. And by the way, I have a daughter who is a sophomore at LSU right now, and she too is on TOPS. I had a call a while ago about a constitutional convention. I don't believe that one is required at this point. I believe that we can enact some structural changes to Louisiana where a constitutional amendment is required. We can do that. But there's an awful lot we can do just through statutory change as well. The simple fact of the matter is we don't have sufficient revenue at present to support higher education, irrespective of other things that may or may not be protected. So we're going to have to always make sure that we're operating the state government by taking advantage of every opportunity for savings and efficiencies. And you should do that whether you're running surpluses or deficits. And then we have to also look at make sure we reduce tax expenditures in addition to just traditional expenditures. And then where necessary, we have to raise revenue. I will tell you we have to provide more state general fund support for higher education and rely less on the tuition and fee component because that is the only long-term answer that's going to fix the problem. 877-217-5757 is your number for
Governor John Bel Edwards. The show is Ask the Governor, and we have Beck from Lafayette. Beck, good afternoon. You're on the air.
Hello, Governor. Thanks for taking my call.
Good afternoon.
I have a question. Since we have such a shortfall and there's such abuse going on in the Medicaid, the Medicaid, why can't we impose like a $20 copay when they go into the emergency room?
Well, first of all, under traditional Medicaid program, those copays are not allowed by the federal government. Secondly, with respect to the expansion population, copays are part of my plan, not as it relates to going to a primary care physician, but as it relates to going to an emergency room. The maximum copay you can charge under federal law is $8. That is part of my plan, but I would tell you that we don't have significant problems around fraud with respect to the Medicaid program, and I know that you've heard that. But the simple fact of the matter is we've privatized the Medicaid program so that we pay a set premium amount per month per member to private insurance companies. The insurance companies then assume the risk of loss associated with fraud, waste, and abuse, not the state of Louisiana. And we did that as a way to modernize our system and to transfer that risk of loss. And so the idea that the state of Louisiana is losing a lot of money each year because of Medicaid fraud with people accessing services that they shouldn't, that really is not accurate.
Catherine in New Orleans, you're on Ask the Governor. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Governor. Thanks so much for doing this program. I have a question just regarding how this deficit started. I'm wondering if you think that Bobby Jindal should be asked to pay back any money in damages for what...
All right.
Well, Catherine, thank you for the call. I don't think I'm going to touch that one. I will tell you, he left me a big enough present with the largest budget deficit in the history of our state. I'll just thank him for that and move on.
All right. Vicki in Ascension Parish. Vicki?
Yes. Hello, Governor. Thank you for taking my call. And I would like to find out something pertaining to religious freedom. First and foremost, I'm not affiliated with any party. I'm an independent. But I actually walk the pavement supporting you 100%.
All right. We're short on time, but what about religious freedom? That's a broad topic, but Governor, any parting thoughts?
Well, I will tell you, thank you, Vicki, for the call, and I appreciate your support. In 2010, I voted for the Preservation of Religious Freedom Act that became law and that affords the strongest protections available to religious organizations to make sure that they can act in a manner that is consistent with their faith. I don't believe in Louisiana right now that we have a need to go further with respect to some of the things that you're seeing in the legislature. But I appreciate the question, Vicki.
Well, we thank you for joining us today, Governor, and hope you'll be back next month.